Okay, so essentially now we've got this disinfectant in the water. And so the chlorine basically mixes with the treated water that was done at the plant, and you've got your pipe going down, you've got all these little particles of chlorine that are flowing through in your water. Now most of those remain as your disinfectant, and that helps keep your water treated so you can drink it. But some of these particles, they bind with other things that are in the water, these organics that are still in the water, minerals and so on and so forth. And obviously when they bind together, they create other products. Now these byproducts are potentially harmful to people. The byproducts that we're most concerned about, they're called trihalomethylchlorines, THMs, and HAAs. And so what happens is we regularly test for these byproducts. We're testing our water to make sure it's safe, and we test it at various points throughout town. Now, tracking this data over the last few years, we're getting more and more organics in our water. And we talked about water source earlier, but essentially if you track this through the data that we have, you would come up with a chart where it says, okay, this is where THMs are safe based on what Health Canada says, and this is where our THM levels are at. And so there are times where we are obviously exceeding that recommended dose. Now, THMs themselves are carcinogenic, and what that means is that they have a potential to increase your ability to see cancer. Obviously that's something that the town is very concerned about, one of the biggest reasons that we've switched over to something different. The other reason is that chlorine will dissipate over time in the treated water. And so a lot of times, your water that's going to your house, these are your transmission lines that go out there underneath the road, they go out to your house, and the water that you may be drinking out of your tap could have been made 2, 3, 4 days ago. And so that's why we use the disinfectant to obviously keep that water safe to drink, keep these viruses and bacteria and everything from growing. But if it's dissipating over time, the longer you make that system, the more issues that you could get. So some of the things that have been suggested was, well, why don't we just put a bunch of extra chlorine stations at different spots? We can keep the chlorine up, and then the water would be safe to drink, and we wouldn't have to worry about chloramines. The issue, obviously, then comes down to the fact that chlorine is our biggest issue right now because it's binding with these organics and creating these THMs, which are harmful. So adding those chlorine stations fixes one issue, but it doesn't fix a bigger problem. So obviously there's some risks in anything that we do. One of the risks that we have, probably one of the most significant risks with chloramine, is to fish. Fish basically ingest things into their bloodstream through their gills. Chlorine, for example, is an issue for us as well. Anyone who has a fish tank, you don't just turn on the tap and stick your fish in it. You would treat the water first, or you'd leave it sit for 24 hours and let the chlorine evaporate out, and so on and so forth. Animals, plants, humans, we don't have gills. We don't ingest that stuff into our bloodstream the same way, and essentially our bodies are made to digest and break things down. So to drink chlorine water, which we drink out of the tap right now, is not harmful to us. Our body will break down these chemicals inside us, and we won't have any issues. Chloramine is no different. So to drink chloraminated water, you probably have, chances are you drank this water before. When you went to Edmonton, you've been to Fort McMurray, you stayed at a friend's house, you've been somewhere at a hotel. And so essentially your body will break all these things down. Your pets will be able to break those things down. Your horses will be able to break those things down. And they're not hazardous. So the next question is what happens to this water? So we've talked about in your body it breaks down naturally and it goes away. But what about water that runs down the sink? And obviously that water goes somewhere. And so I just want to highlight real quick, in town basically what happens is this water goes into our sewer system, it goes out to our septic ponds. So out by the Live Fire Center on Highway 88, we've got these 3 giant ponds in the back, and we aerate them, we settle them, there's naturally occurring nature organic things that happen, and these compounds break apart. No different than chlorine dissipates, chloramine will do the exact same thing. Eventually it dissipates and goes away. Our ponds are set up to be able to deal with this, and eventually this water is discharged back out into the main system. There's tons of testing that we have to do to make sure that the water we send back is safe, whether it's chlorinated water or chloraminated water. In the MD, you might have septic fields, so there are things. Obviously, this water goes into a big septic tank and it goes out into the ground, out into a field, and so on and so forth. So, same thing, these particles, this chloraminated water will break down. And in fact, the ammonia that's on that water, the soil obviously loves ammonia, so it's a fertilizer and it's going to be absorbed and so on and so forth.